As Kaido's Hasaikai slammed into the once inflated body of Luffy in his Gear 4th form, a crackling fallout of Conqueror's Haki will be felt as all the air responsible for Luffy's size will be compressed and shifted to his right arm. This was it. The finale of the greatest fight either combatant had ever experienced. Yet, Kaido, despite cementing his own victory, was visibly disheartened and pained by this. The win, albeit his to claim, was now devoid of glory on account of CP0's sudden intervention. What was moments before the most exciting all-or-nothing final confrontation between the two was now a complete and utter disappointment for the Draconic Oni. Remember, this is not the first time Kaido had been robbed of a proper conclusion to a glorious battle. When he fought against the legendary samurai Odin, despite nearly being felled by the swordsman and on the verge of being defeated, on account of his forces pretending to have captured his adversary's son, Momonosuke, he was afforded a shameful victory. And despite the glee of those who had assisted in this, Kaido was clearly unsettled. As Luffy's body slammed into the ground, blood would spew from his mouth as Kaido begrudgingly followed through with his decisive blow, all while the Cypher Pole intruder remained still with his head lowered. He had successfully fulfilled the order issued to him by the Five Elders. Monkey D. Luffy had been eliminated, a perceived to be impossible task intended to prevent the worst case scenario from coming to pass. More on that later. The other CP0 agents at that very moment would make their way elsewhere, and from this point, the air would leave Luffy's body as Kaido overlooked its escape into the infinite expanse. The displeasure was written all over his face. Just before, he had denounced the ways of Wano samurai when Luffy advocated for their strength. Yet by the look of things, despite being a man of such compromised morality, there was a sense of pride possessed by the behemoth that has now been wounded on yet another occasion. Now, Momonosuke would notice the absence of Luffy's voice immediately. And the voice being referenced here is not in the literal sense, but rather the voice of all things, an exceedingly rare ability that Luffy possessed to a degree unseen in any other, as he was able to not only hear the voice like Momonosuke does, he could also speak it. To have lost his voice is a very concerning circumstance indeed, as even while being rendered unconscious on account of Kaido's attack and later drowning, Luffy still possessed a voice perceivable by Momonosuke. Luffy's body was now limp as he fell flat on the battlefield. Kaido was very clearly exhausted as he breathed heavily, still with a visible discomfort written all over his face. Meanwhile, Luffy was gone. His body was now devoid of life. Kaido had won, and now only he and the Cypher Pole agent remained standing. Before questioning the government dog, he asked him if he had any idea what he had just done, with a definite expression of dismay. The agent remained unmoving and wordless as he shifted his hat. This was a suicide mission, a sacrifice decided by his superiors for the sake of avoiding their fears. Kaido, now filled to the brim with frustration, would yet again raise his weapon over his head and this time crush the intruder. In the meanwhile, the other agent previously discussed would slowly and silently make their way to an open window before tipping their hat just as the other had done before. A final salute of sorts in recognition of the job's completion. When it comes to bringing some of the best One Piece content on the platform, Plot Armor has you covered, so be sure to subscribe to the channel with notifications on. In the wake of Kaido's destructive blows, the ceiling would begin to collapse at an accelerated rate. To this, Kawamatsu would express his frustration with their current predicament as thousands of their allies were still on the premises. With them being suspended in the air, there was no water to help quell the flames caused by Kanjuro's incinerary final gambit. And so the best they could do was urge everyone to flee, as there was no honor to be found in such a fiery death. As just then, death from above would rear its wretched serpentine head with a staggering breath attack. Kaido had returned triumphant before the many forces of the battlefield. He would demand the surrender of their leader, Momonosuke. And yet again, he would proclaim the demise of Straw Hat Luffy. With this heavy blow to their morale, he would welcome any would-be challengers to show themselves. The remaining Beast Pirates would now rejoice, as the brave warriors of Wano would remain in disbelief. Now, the response to this revelation by way of Law was really surprising, as he too would comment that Luffy's voice had vanished. therefore confirming his ability to also perceive the voice of all things. And with it being such an obscenely rare ability, I mean rarer than even Conqueror's Haki, his possession of this will no doubt be a major bit of information to keep in mind for preceding events. Regardless, both he and Kid were most definitely unsettled by this revelation, as to follow their victory over Big Mom, they had nothing left to give. Chopper would begin to wail at the top of his lungs as tears flooded his face, and now knowing that his captain was dead. Tamatu would be distraught as Nami would march out, certain that Kaido was lying, that Luffy could not have lost, that him being dead was impossible. And she was so bold in this certainty and proclamation of hers that she would catch the attention of Kaido himself, who would take notice of her unbroken spirit and concentrate a breath attack aimed at her, only for Marco, the former 1st Division commander of the Whitebeard Pirates, to defend her. What's more is that he would urge them all to not give in to despair, that it is not over just yet. And this is admittedly a pretty painful sentiment to receive from a character like Marco for sure, considering the loss of his own captain and brothers in arms in a similarly climactic battle. Kaido would now follow up with yet another announcement, that Onigashima would now descend upon the Flower Capital without delay, and he would refer to the cruelty of Orochi as soft in comparison to what he was willing to do, continuing by making it clear that Wano was nothing more than a massive weapons factory to him. Whether man, woman, or child, everyone in Wano was his slave. They were welcome to die only after their bodies wouldn't work any longer. Labor was the only thing left for them all to experience. They were disposable. And seeing as how they invoked his wrath by way of opposition, such an outcome should not be surprising. But best believe this chapter has some major surprises ahead. The swordsmen of Wano had effectively bet their rights and aspirations on this war and had lost. Their fates were sealed. Once more, Kaido would demand the enemy bring Momonosuke before him, otherwise the carnage would continue. And with this newfound shift in morale, several opportunistic beast pirate goons would make their way towards the presently downed Law and Kid, hoping to have their moment of glory. This was really bad since they could not even defend themselves against enemies as weak as these guys. However, thankfully, their crewmates would come to their aid and repel the assault of these grunts. Carrot and Nekomamushi would hear the sudden commotion and aim to lend some assistance as well. And as if Kaido wasn't bad enough, the flames were consuming the terrain as several injured samurai were trapped in the basement as they continued to spread. Now, despite having just taken down an Emperor of the Sea, Law and Kid refused to stay down. Surrender was out of the question. With things going as they were, the two were intent on fighting until the bitter end, all while Law still could not believe what had happened to Luffy. And you know what? Yamato would advocate for Momonosuke doing the very same, fighting until his dying breath, but Momonosuke refused, saying that if Luffy lost to Kaido, what could he possibly hope to accomplish? Yet Yamato would retort that this is the way of the samurai, that everyone else was at their limit, so it was up to them to take on Kaido, that even Kaido must be exhausted by now. And Yamato had faced off against Kaido before, and the results weren't exactly pretty. Even now, with Kaido having sustained as much damage as he has, I still highly doubt Yamato would even make a dent. And if nothing else, Momonosuke would simply be a nuisance to Kaido, nibbling at his heels. Thinking practically, if not a bit cowardly, Momonosuke was reluctant to risk any more of his people's lives. That if Luffy had been defeated, perhaps their only choice was to concede. But Yamato refused. The people to be spared would end up leading lives of complete and utter misery. Surrender was not a mercy, it was a lifelong punishment. Furthermore, expressing the regrets of those who had allowed Orochi to have his way in the past. That every injustice the people of Wano had endured over the course of the last 2 decades was for the sake of this ever important battle. That even if surrender was their only option, death was a preferable choice. Momonosuke could clearly see the determination and unwavering resolve in Yamato's eyes. And there were others who felt the very same way as well, who were willing to fight until the very end. And because of this, because Momonosuke had yet to yield, Kaido's rampage would continue on. However, something incredibly miraculous was on the verge of occurring, unbeknownst to everyone. Luffy's lifeless body remained undisturbed by the present happenings of the mortal world around it. But would you believe it? Luffy's heart, that had ceased all function, would suddenly jumpstart itself once more and begin beating. With that, the elephant Zunisha was suddenly alerted to something and proceeded to speak to Momonosuke, exclaiming that they could hear it. Luffy's heart would continue to beat, his hand now twitching as the colossal elephant would begin to reminisce, saying that it really takes them back. Momonosuke was certainly confused by this and would question what the creature was referring to. Zunisha would express that it could hear the drums of liberation, a sound now heard for the first time in 800 years. Finally, without a doubt, he was there. The greatest fear of the world government, the advent to which the 5 Elder Stars desperately sought to prevent. Momonosuke would question who exactly the elephant was referring to, and that's when Zunisha would say his name. Joy Boy! Joy Boy has finally returned! Life has returned to the body of Luffy, along with quite the smile indeed. Luffy's visage has changed rather dramatically, as his hair appears to have undergone a dramatic shift in elasticity, all while a wellspring of smoke that would make Gear 2nd blush would arise from his body. This is not a gear transformation. This is not Gear 5th. This is something entirely different and absolutely changes everything. Luffy died, and with that, perhaps like Brook, his devil fruit has awakened. Yet in the same vein, the Gorosei to some extent seem to have foreseen its occurrence and with certainty deemed Luffy to be the vessel for such a thing, for Joy Boy. Presumably on account of his devil fruit, which had once, supposedly, been stolen from the world government by Shanks. Now, in the midst of the reverie, Shanks met with the 5 elders in regards to a particular pirate. And given this ever so sudden move by the elders, as opposed to meeting with these men in regards to Blackbeard as he had with Whitebeard in the past, it would seem this conversation may have entailed Luffy, the conduit for Joy Boy's triumphant return. Thank you all so much for watching, and have an awesome day. I love you.